back in Britain and they just can't resist having another go at some of our idols of the past. When I first met Michael Jackson was a fascinating time, which I'll tell you in a moment. But one of the many things that happened was I criticised him a lot in my column in The Sun, and especially criticised his management. Now, his manager was Frank DeLeo, who I called the fire hydrant because he looked like a fire hydrant, who I known for years. He was a junior promotion man when I first became a consultant to CBS Records. And in one column I really slagged Frank off after he became Michael's manager. I bumped into him at one of those awards dues and he said, "Oh, Jonathan, I'm pleased to meet you. I was so offended by your column that I decided to have you kneecapped or possibly killed. But then I thought about it and I decided not to." And I said, "Oh, why not, Frank?" He said, "Because I like you," which made me giggle. That's the way the mafia worked in the good old days of the music industry. So back in the 1970s, I was driving my Rolls Royce in London and stopped at traffic lights at the Edgware Road. Over the other side of the Edgware Road, a limousine pulled up at traffic lights. The back door flew open and this small lad leapt out, rushed across the Edgware Road, almost being killed by the traffic, and tapped on my window. I lowered the window and he said, "Excuse me, are you Jonathan King?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I've always wanted to meet you. I'm Michael Jackson, the singer with the Jackson 5. So I said, "Well, nice to meet you, Michael," and shook his hand, and he zipped back across the Edgware Road, again almost being killed by the traffic, jumped into the back of the limousine, and off we went when the lights changed. And I noticed that the driver of the limousine was Barry Murfitt. Barry Murfitt had been my chauffeur a year or two earlier when I'd been banned for driving for 6 months because of speeding offence or something. And he'd obviously said to the band who were in the back of the limousine, "Oh, that's Jonathan King, I used to drive for him." So why did Michael rush across to meet me? Well, my suspicion is, many years earlier in the 1960s, there started a convention for music people called MIDEM in the south of France in January. People from music got together to discuss the music world and sort out any problems. And on the very first one, I think it was, I was there speaking, or at least involved in it, and coming back, flying back on the plane from Nice back to London. In the seat next to me was this sweet little girl who was also a singer, a pop singer, who just also at the same time as me had a couple of big hit records. And she introduced herself to me as Diana Ross, the lead singer with a group called the Supremes. And we chatted for the flight, got on like a house on fire, and that was all. Well, I reckon Diana Ross, who was quite a close friend of Michael Jackson's, told him all about me, and that's what interested him, and that's why he leapt across the road to meet me. I've always rather regretted that I didn't make more of that and contact him and get to be friends. We did meet many times after that, but that one time, I think if only I'd befriended him and got to know him, his life would have been very different, hopefully just as successful, if not more successful. But on a personal level, I think he would have been a happier human being. Talking of Michael Jackson, I always thought of him as a bit of a Peter Pan kind of figure, and you'll see he crops up very briefly in the introduction to one of my films, Guilty, which I made in, I think, 2018, 2019, which is free to view online if you want to watch it. And I thought you might be intrigued by the opening few minutes of the film, which does, I have to say, show me completely naked. So it really is not work friendly. In fact, it's not friendly on any level. If you find the sight of a naked Jonathan offensive, and believe me, any normal human being does.
Don't act little when you're with me. Don't be small when I'm around. Think big and look at what you see, and keep your feet on the ground. We go to parties with each other. You live in the shadow of a man. You can't imagine being without me, 'cause that's when your life began. But baby, don't act little when you're with me. Don't be small when I'm around. Think big and look at what you see, and keep your feet on the ground.
I want to take you back in time. Way back in time. Hello, I'm Diane Cilento. I know what you're thinking. She's gone right off. Actually, she's gone off much more than I have, because she died in 2011, age 78, after a very happy and successful life. The only thing we've got in common is that we're both actresses. I'm an actress pretending to be an actress, pretending to be Diane Cilento. In fact, not even that. I'm not even a real actress. Anyway, I want to take you way back in time, back to 1956, when, in the island of Bermuda, she was filming the wonderful smash hit film The Admirable Crichton with the deeply wonderful Kenneth More and the equally wonderful Cecil Parker.
Are you ambitious?
My lady, I am the son of a butler and a lady's maid, the happiest of all combinations.
The Admirable Crichton was a story written by J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. Originally a successful stage play, it was about a shipwreck. The people stranded on a desert island were the upstairs and downstairs inhabitants of a posh London mansion, and very soon the leader, or governor, became the butler Crichton, played by Kenneth More, and Tweenie, his between-stairs maid, Diane Cilento. In America, it was renamed Paradise Lagoon, and it became the second most popular movie in the world in 1957, after the wonderful High Society, starring Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and perhaps the only actress nearly as gorgeous as Diane Cilento, Grace Kelly. Anyway, we all went to Bermuda and found this fabulous deserted cove. The only person who ever came there was a handsome boy who lived nearby. He was called Dennis Corday. 17-year-old Diane immediately hit it off with the only other person of a similar age. Director Lewis Gilbert had taken Dennis on as an odd job boy and general dog's body, and he was a huge hit with the cast and the crew, being willing and strong and energetic and helpful. After Diane informed Dennis that she'd just married, and Dennis let Diane know that a relationship was out of the question anyway, as he was gay, they became close friends. As indeed Dennis did with Kenny Moore and Lewis Gilbert and the entire party. They worked happily for months. In later life, when watching the movie, Butler Crichton brings cocktails to the rescuers, served in coconut shells. Dennis used to say with pride, "I made those coconut glasses." More on Michael Jackson. People have asked me, so why were you involved? Why did you get to meet him later on? Well, in the 1990s, I became, I think 80s and 90s, I became a consultant to CBS Records. I'd given up the record industry, being very disappointed when I ran my own label by 10cc leaving the label, breaking contract and going to another big music corporation for much more money. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Every time I build and develop an artist, they will leave to go somewhere else. It really is not worth putting in the effort. And I sort of moved out of the music industry. But one of my very dear friends was a man called Dick Asher, who at the time was running CBS in Great Britain, in London. And he said to me, "Jonathan, we really could do with your knowledge and your experience. Would you like to be a consultant?" And I said, well, why not? It means popping in for a meeting once a month or twice a month, giving him advice on what he should or shouldn't be promoting and working with, which, funny enough, years later, when I was consultant to Jive Zomba, I did, going through demos and advising them that they really should work. This, I thought, very talented singer called R. Kelly. But anyway, that's another story. So I said, yes, okay, and I became a consultant to Dick. Dick then got promoted to basically in charge of the whole of the CBS record industry, business, in New York. And I continued as his consultant and did many things, one of which was, at the point of Michael Jackson's career, he'd made an album which was very successful, but had actually cost CBS a fortune. A, because I had to pay for it, and B, because even though it sold very well, it didn't make nearly as much as they'd spent, both to him and to promote it and everything else. I think it was the Off the Wall album, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Anyway, all the A&R staff, artists and repertoire staff at CBS said to Dick, look, this kid is such a pain in the arse to deal with, and he's really not selling big. We could save the money by dropping him from the label and investing it in probably 10 other talents, all of which are hugely talented, and we can build them at much less expense and have 2 or 3 artists as big as him. And I said to Dick, excuse me, are you barking mad? This is one of the great talents of our time. He is going to be absolutely enormous. Don't even think about dropping him. Give him anything he wants because you'll make millions from it. And Dick, actually, who always really believed in my thoughts and my opinions, went with me. And sometime later, Michael Jackson gave him the album Thriller. So that was my early experience of being a consultant to CBS, which was a very lucrative job. I did it for CBS and for Jive Zomba, and then later on for various other companies, including BMG. It was great because I earned a huge amount of money for doing very little, just giving them advice. And as a result, I was able to build up a nest egg that was going to be my pension. Unfortunately, of course, the entire lot was spent in 2001 fighting my defence against crimes which never had taken place, and spending all the money on lawyers way back then, but I wasn't to know that. Anyway, I went on as a consultant, and I met Michael on several occasions. He was a very sweet, very nice, very genuine young man who had never had a childhood and desperately wanted to be a child, with childish friends, doing childish things, playing childish games. I mean, when I was with him, we were always giggling and laughing in a very babyish kind of way, because that's what he was. Anyway, I did actually have one encounter with him which is absolutely fascinating, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Another of my movies, and you may notice that in this episode I'm showing you clips from movies rather than actually music clips, although they do include music, which is also free online, was the follow-up to Vile Pervert the Musical. Now, Vile Pervert the Musical was a film I made back in, I think, 2007 or 2008, which basically put my side of the story of what happened to me, or what had happened to me in 2001, that made me essentially leave the music industry and indeed leave society as we know it, entering Her Majesty's prison estate and becoming a vile pervert in the eyes of the media, and as a result disappearing basically from public view. And I think you might be interested in the first few minutes of another film, of this film, which is also available free online if you want to watch the whole film, Vile Pervert, the sequel. But one of the reasons I wanted to show you this is not only the post office crusade is sort of not going very well at the moment. Most people are coming back to me and saying, look, the problem is the actual post office scandal, as highlighted by the wonderful Mr. Bates versus the post office on ITV, is really going nowhere. But even if it does go somewhere, it's because it was a one-issue thing about the post office basically being dishonest with their Horizon computer methods, and leading to loads of convictions of crimes which were unsafe and wrong. What I'm fighting for, which is a much larger false allegations industry and the criminal justice system, which doesn't work anymore, is too big for the public to cope with. They can't see that general idea. They only really are interested in specific small things, like the Horizon computer system was faulty, and these people, as a result, went to prison for crimes that didn't happen. And that's simple. You can understand it. My ideas about the criminal justice system are very complex and far too great for the vast majority of the public, of the great British public, who, let's face it, have got very small brains with very small cells functioning, and find it quite difficult to think of anything more than what shall I wear going out today and what shall I have for dinner. That's about the maximum that their silly little brains can consider. But anyway, I thought it was worthwhile showing you this. I made these movies now for many years, 15 years, I think, coming up for 20 years soon. And like A Victim Bites Back, they get a lot of traction. A lot of people watch them. A lot of people seem to think I make a great deal of sense. But other than providing entertainment or interest for people, they then shrug their shoulders and get on with their lives. And actually, to do something like have a gathering for not only the post office would probably only provoke a flicker of interest with the public, who go, you know what? We don't really care. What we care about is what we're having for dinner tonight and whether my wife or husband or children or whoever is having an affair or not, and how my career is going and how long I'm going to survive for. Anyway, here's the first few minutes of Vile Pervert, the sequel. Allow me to tell you a story going way, way back in time, to the 1940s when the Second World War was drawing to a close. A young couple gave birth to their first child. Living in this very flat on Gloucester Road in London, the mother used to breastfeed the boy, gazing out of the kitchen window as she enjoyed a cup of tea and watched the world pass by outside. Around the corner were St Andrew's Mansions, where her mother Vera lived and where the boy himself would live for a short while, nearly 20 years later. The family moved down to Surrey and he grew up in Newhurst at Brookhurst Grange, playing in the hollow oak tree, visiting his uncle and aunt across the road in Lukins. Before moving to Cobbetts, a cottage built in 1480 in the nearby village of Forest Green. Hold on a moment, this is meant to be a sequel, not a prequel. Enough of all this nostalgia. We switch to Great Britain in the second decade of the next century, where our hero, the Vile Pervert, is moving into his 70s, slowly but surely. Oh, it's you. No, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Fuck off. Hello there. My films are rather different from anyone else's, aren't they? I like to think they're a bit like the old movies of Derek Jarman and John Waters and Andy Warhol, and hopefully they don't even look like each other. This technically is Vile Pervert the sequel, the follow-up to Vile Pervert the musical, which I made in 2008. It has nothing to do with being a vile pervert. It's actually a very valuable tuition course in how to make a multi-million smash without spending too much money. When we left each other a few years ago, I'd just been released from prison, where I'd spent 3.5 years of a 7-year sentence for crimes that never took place. Yes, you heard that right. It wasn't just that I hadn't committed them, they never happened at all in the first place. I was amazed and astonished to discover that a jury simply couldn't believe that publicity about celebrities could provoke false allegations, delusions, exaggerations, inflations, all kinds of different ideas far removed from the reality. That's the job of the media, you see, to create an image, to create something that is a delusion, a fantasy that doesn't really exist. A land of bright colours, extreme behaviour, black and white and no grey, because it's easier to give complex problems simple solutions. Media publicity provokes false allegations. At last, 14 years later, ordinary people are starting to realise this, and juries are acquitting victims. Politicians love simple solutions too. Headline slogans, instant answers. Nobody has the time or the inclination to think deeply, to imagine repercussions and consequences. It's become the same with music. Catchy choruses, hooks, simple melodies, 3 chords. Mind you, I've always loved 3 chords. When I was an undergraduate at Cambridge, I wrote and sang Everyone's Gone to the Moon, and instead of following it up with another hit on my own name, I found a little group called Hedgehoppers Anonymous, who were performing in Cambridge at the time, and produced a record called It's Good News Week, mainly with session musicians, which we called Hedgehoppers Anonymous, and it went straight into the top 5 in 1965. For the Hedgehoppers Anonymous follow-up, I wrote and produced a song called Don't Push Me, and recorded it with Jimmy Page on guitar and Big Jim Sullivan, but the record flopped completely. So on my release from prison in 2005, I wrote a new lyric to the same melody and called it Plead Guilty. The message of the song basically is, whatever you do, don't plead guilty. Facing false allegations, don't seek felicitations or good prognostications. They won't be your legal expectations. We'll bypass all the stations, defying good relations. Just you see, you may have done no wrong. Your morals may be strong. You'll want to scream and shout and let it all hang out. But I am warning you, the verdict's never true. Whatever you do, plead guilty. You'll never get a break. They'll tie you to the stake. Get out for heaven's sake. Plead guilty. Your brief in grubby wig says if you give a fig, the sentence will be big. Unless he comes up with a solution, does deals with prosecution, the judge in restitution will bow to prostitution, and you'll go almost free. That's how the law will be. Whatever you do, plead guilty. The jury doesn't care. They wish they wasn't there. They only hope you'll dare. Plead guilty. The law ignores the truth. No need for any proof. Justice remains aloof. Plead guilty. When you're in jail for years, don't bother shedding tears. Never trust men in gowns who are there to put you down. They only want to screw you for just being you. Don't whatever you do, plead guilty. Don't whatever you do, plead guilty. In this new century, that's become even more appropriate. Lawyers will tell their defendant clients to plead guilty to crimes that never took place. My final Michael Jackson story, and I did meet him a few times, concerns his interviews on television and his a particular incident when he performed live. As consultant to CBS, I started worrying about the way Michael Jackson's image was coming across. All that Bubbles the chimp and sleeping in that kind of, in that coffin and all the rest of it. So I actually suggested to CBS that they should tell Michael Jackson he should stop giving interviews. And they did indeed do that. The only problem was I was doing a series at the time for the BBC called Entertainment USA, when I travelled around the United States, interviewing people, looking at various cities and all the rest of it. And I was somewhere where Michael was going to be, and I decided I should really interview him. So we put in a formal request to his management, and back came the reply, "Look, we're terribly sorry, but some stupid person at CBS has suggested that Michael stop doing interviews, so we're going to stop doing any interviews. We suggest you contact whoever that person is and see what his feeling is on the matter." And of course, they knew full well it was me, and actually, I think I was right. He was right to stop giving interviews and talking about things like Bubbles the chimp. Anyway, we remained friends. I mean, on a simplistic level, And around a few years later, I think it was later, that Motown were having a huge concert. I think their 25th anniversary or something. I remember it was in Anaheim or somewhere in California, and it was being filmed and televised, and I was given a ticket, if not in the front row, certainly in the front or second row. And everybody was on the show, including the Jackson 5. And at one point, the Jackson 5, having done all their greatest hits, Michael stepped forward and said, "Those were great hits and great records, but I'm making some interesting music now too on my own," and then proceeded to do, I think for the first time ever, Billie Jean and his Moonwalk. Well, I've got to say, the entire crowd absolutely were hypnotized by this. It was, I have to say, the single greatest performance I've ever seen. And at the end, of course, everybody stood and applauded, although it was quite interesting. There were a lot of music industry people there. And I noticed that most of them looked quite sour about it because they realised the talent they were working with was so much smaller than the talent they'd just seen. Anyway, afterwards, we went to a sort of silly reception. They have these receptions after these concerts that very important people are invited to. And I was, of course, very important, as well as being extraordinarily good looking, as I still am today. So I went there, and after a few minutes, everybody was mixing around, drinking champagne, eating caviar, and doing the usual things you do at those meet and greet things. And various people had turned up, and Michael arrived. Well, the first thing he did was come over to me and say, "Hi, Jonathan, what did you think? Was I good? Was I brilliant?" And I said, "Yes, Michael, you were fantastic." But Michael was as high as a kite, not on drugs, but on the adrenaline that he'd got from his incredible performance. Well, it took me 20 minutes, literally 20 minutes, to tug him back down to the earth because he was so high on the adrenaline that I couldn't let him talk to anybody else until he was back down to normal again, which he did eventually get to, thanking me profusely for doing it to him. Anyway, rest in peace, Michael. Like many others in the music industry and in the entertainment world and in the world in general, not the monster depicted by media since he's died, a very sweet, incredibly talented young lad who basically suffered through an awful childhood where he wasn't allowed to have a childhood. I thought he was a very sweet guy, but most of all, incredibly talented. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it.